Hello folks, Irish Paul Graham here again. This part of the lesson relates to the semi-automatic handgun. Now, the previous lesson was about revolvers. We covered that in some detail. Now we're going to have a brief history lesson regarding the semi-automatic handgun. And this is the daddy of them all, granddaddy of them all if you like. This is the famous Colt 1911. Now, it's made by lots of people other than Colt. This one's a fairly modern Rock Island version. It's one of the cheapest ones you can buy. Costs you $425 at Durham Gunsmith. But I'm going to go over the features of this veritable design, which is an American classic and which has been the basis for so much that has come after it. Now, like the revolver, we have some common components that you will find in pretty much all of them. You have the frame or receiver. That's this part of the body that includes the grip and the trigger guard. You have the slide, and it's called a slide because it slides back and forwards. Now, if you take out the removable box magazine, that's what separates a revolver from a semi-auto. A semi-auto keeps the ammunition in a box magazine which goes into the gun, and then when you rack the slide, you move the slide back and let it go. And if you had a full magazine, in fact I have a magazine of drill rounds, so just for the purpose, there's a drill round. It has no primer in it and no powder, so it's just a drill round. If you put in loaded magazine, rack the slide, that takes the top round from the magazine into the chamber. So if you take the magazine off and work it, the round flies out. Now, at the same time as it does that, the hammer comes to the rear and the gun is ready to shoot. Now, it's ready to shoot as, oh, bullet here. The gun is ready to shoot in what's known as single action mode. So pulling the trigger brings about one single action, which is dropping the hammer. And as the hammer drops, it hits the firing pin, detonates the round fires, slide comes to the rear, ejects the empty case, strips another round from the magazine, and you're ready to shoot again. And that's how a semi-auto pistol works, but we're slightly jumping ahead here. So you've got the slide, you've got the frame or receiver. Typically it's the receiver that has a serial number on it. You've got the barrel, which is hidden inside the slide. You've got the ejection port, which is this hole in the top of the slide. And what you can't really see until you pull them back is the extractor and the ejector. Now, the extractor does what it says. It extracts the round from the chamber, the empty round or live round if you haven't fired it. So it's like a little claw, and the little claw goes in to the rimmed portion of the cartridge and pulls it out, and the ejector typically is a protrusion that the round hits, and it gives it momentum to fly out. Typically when you fire a semi-auto, the empty cases when they're ejected will go to the right, and they'll either go to the right slightly forward, directly to the side, or over your shoulder. If there's a problem with the gun, they'll come back and hit you in the head, but that's another story. So you have the barrel, which we can see poking out now because the slide's to the rear. We've got the extractor and ejector. On the grip, you've got the grips on either side. You've got the front strap, which in this case is exposed metal. You've got the back strap, and this being the 1911, you've got a grip safety. Now the idea of the grip safety is, if the grip safety is not depressed and you try to pull the trigger, it won't work, and that's a safety feature of this particular design. You have to be depressing that in order for the trigger to work. So that's a safety feature on this gun. So the trigger guard, slide stop notch. Now, with an empty magazine on the gun, when you run out of ammunition, slide comes to the rear. It stays to the rear because the empty magazine has pushed a little device which engages the slide stop notch. Now you take the magazine off, it is still held to the rear. If you put in a loaded magazine and push down the slide release, it'll chamber the round, the gun's cocked and you're ready to carry on firing. Moving on through the parts. This gun, being a single action, hammers to the rear, small amount of pressure but set off the trigger. So we have a safety catch. The safety catch can be operated with your thumb. The gun's designed primarily for right-handed operation. So the safety catch is engaged. Now, even with the grip safety, I pull the trigger, nothing happens. The safety catch is keeping that all locked up. When we release the safety catch, and this is the way you would carry a 1911, you have it loaded, cocked and locked. So it's cocked, the hammer's to the rear, it's locked because the safety catch is in there. You bring it from the draw, bring it up. You're still not fingering the trigger, which will be covered in some detail on the safety side of things. But you bring the gun out of the holster, your fingers on the outside of the frame, you sweep off the safety with your thumb, you take up the pressure, get a proper grip, get the gun into shooting condition, line up the sights, squeeze the trigger, boom. So that's how cocked and locked works. Cocked, locked, can be carried safely in a holster, but still can be made ready to shoot at short notice. There are a few features when it comes to stripping. There's a certain procedure you go through. You depress this, you turn the bushing at the end of the barrel, you get the slide back to the right position, you can pop out this takedown lever. Now this does double duty because this is your slide release. So the slide release catch is also used when dismantling the gun. You pop it out from the other side, you take it out, and that's part of the procedure to dismantle it. I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but just know the 1911, which is still in service widely all over the world, still very popular with various groups. Not so much with law enforcement, and I'll go into that when I go into the next gun here. But the 1911 45 ACP, ACP stands for automatic Colt pistol, fires 230 grain round nose bullet is what it was designed for. Very accurate, very controllable, nice gun to shoot, potent knockdown power. The original GI magazines held 7 rounds, which give you one more than the typical revolver of the period. You can always put one in the chamber and top up your magazines. That gives you 7+1. A more modern magazine will hold 8 rounds in the same space. It's just designed slightly different spring. So you can have a 1911 8+1 rounds without it being any significantly bigger or anything. But it is big, it is heavy, and as a concealed carry gun, it's not very satisfactory for that reason. This is a gun that belongs in a holster, in open carry on someone's side, or in a military situation. For the average concealed carry holder, perhaps as a car gun, or a gun you would have in your glove box, fine for that. But to hide on your person in summer clothes in North Carolina, probably not that satisfactory. So we'll put that aside. 1911, this was a groundbreaking design, but 1911 was 105 years ago. So it has had great legs, a fantastically long service life, but for various reasons, technology has kind of moved on, and we're going to look at some of those move-ons now. Now this is a gun from the 1980s. This is a gun that I would have been familiar with. It was issued to law enforcement in the USA, but it was also issued to certain categories of police officer in Northern Ireland. So when I was in a specialist unit in 1983, I had one of these, the Smith & Wesson Model 59. Now, in many ways it's very similar to the 1911. You got your foresight, backside, slide, receiver, trigger guard, front strap, back strap. Where it differs is, instead of being cocked and locked, when you go to apply the safety on this gun, it's decocked. It has a safety decocker. So that element of design, law enforcement weren't that happy with a gun where the safety catch potentially could get knocked off, leaving you with a very light trigger pull. So with this gun, what they did was they put some design elements from the, and I'm just realizing that this probably has a disconnect, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the double action trigger. But the way this gun works is, instead of being cocked and locked, you can have a round in the chamber, you can drop the hammer, leave the safety off, and the gun will not fire. But you can pull through on what is quite a long and spongy double action pull on your first shot, and that'll bring the hammer back and drop it. Now it won't do it because the magazine disconnect, but this is a much safer way to carry a gun with the hammer down on a live round in the chamber. Then you bring the gun out, your first shot's double action, boom, and then your subsequent shots are single action. So your long spongy first single action pull, this gun's chambered 9mm, comes with a 15 round magazine. So you've considerably more magazine capacity in a gun that's similar in size and proportion to the 1911, but a bit smaller, not quite as long, little kind of similar in terms of the size of the hand grip. So Smith & Wesson Model 59 brings in the concept of the decocker safety, where you can drop the hammer and leave the gun with the safety either on or off. Now that design was also used in the Walther P38 and the Walther PPK, but it's just a safer way to carry the gun with a live round in the chamber, and your first shot is double action and your follow-up shots are single action. So that's really all we need to know about that for now. It also takes apart in much the same way the slide release lever on this is very similar to the Colt 45, the 1911, insofar as it comes out as part of the stripping process, and the barrel bushing likewise works in a similar way. So you can definitely see the pedigree of the 1911 in the Model 59, but it does a couple of things in a slightly different way. Moving on, here's the SIG. Now this is the SIG P220. Now the P220, we'll just prove it here. It's got an 8-round magazine, it's a standard magazine, so it's pretty darn similar to the 1911. You would cock to put it around the chamber, same as the 1911. And when it's cocked, it just takes a light trigger pull to make the hammer fall. But what's different is instead of having a safety decocker like the Model 59, it has a decocker lever which drops the hammer, and there's no manual safety, so you don't have the option. With the Model 59 you have the option to apply the decocker and leave the safety on. If the safety's on, nothing's happening. If the safety comes off, then you've got a double action pull to make it work. With the SIG, if you decock, there's no manual safety, so your first shot, double action, subsequent shots, single action. So this is a double action, single action, but you don't have the manual safety option, you only have the decocker option. And I would say that for law enforcement and for the military, that's a better design, because you're not going to forget that you have the safety catch on in a high stress situation. These guns have a reputation for accuracy, and it's well deserved, and they're very well made. They're not cheap, and SIG products typically command very good resale value prices. And this is a 45, it's similar in size and feel to 1911, but it's just a safer gun to carry because you don't have to go cocked and locked. You have the decocker and double action, so it just makes it a little more modern in the design and a little bit more user friendly. And then we come to the 1980s. Now the 1980s brought in polymer guns that are made partly of plastic. The slide, the barrel is still steel, but the receiver is made of polymer, and this was the genius of Gaston Glock in terms of using that technology to marry little bits of metal into polymer to make something that's tough and durable, that won't rust. The magazines have got metal inside them, but they're polymer coated. And the magazine capacity, now this is a Glock 23, which is the same size as a Glock 19, which is a smaller version of the Glock 17, and the Glock 17 is what made the reputation. But how this functions, Glocks were designed basically from a blank slate, and what he decided he wanted was a semi-auto that handled like a revolver. And what I mean by that is, when you, now the slide's held back because it's an empty chamber, but when you put a round in the chamber, it works by striker fire. So you pick the gun up, there's no manual safety to forget about or have to deal with. You squeeze the trigger, boom, the gun will fire, and that'll reload and it'll keep going until you run out of ammunition. So the polymer frame, striker fire, doesn't have a hammer the way that either the SIG or the Model 59 had. It has an internal striker, and there are various safeties built in. Now there are different kind of safeties. You've got a trigger safety. If I work it to reset the trigger, if you push the outer parts of the trigger, the gun won't fire. You must have your finger on the inner part of the trigger and squeeze, and the gun comes apart with a fair degree of simplicity. Magazine out, empty chamber, squeeze the trigger, pull it back just a little, drop these two little bars, the slide comes off, and you're left with this very light piece of polymer that weighs next to nothing. You've got the spring, you've got the barrel comes out, and you've got the slide. Now this would be a good point to show you where the extractor is. You have a little claw just before the face of where the firing pin emerges, and that's your extractor that pulls the shell out of the barrel. So when you field strip a Glock, it comes down to four parts. You've got the receiver, the slide, the barrel, and the spring, and that's as far as the average person ever needs to take it to clean it. So this is 1980s technology. We started off with 1911 and now we're up to the 1980s. So what's the next thing to come along? Well, the next thing to come along is the teeny tiny semi-autos. Now it's not to say there weren't teeny tiny semi-autos back in the day. You had the baby Browning, you had some 22s, 25s, you had some really small pistols. But this is the Ruger LCR. Now it's similar to the Glock insofar as it has a polymer frame and a slide. There's a magazine that comes out, which is a common feature to all semi-autos. This will hold 6, so you can get 6 plus 1 in this very small package. Works just the same as the others. You put in a loaded magazine, rack the slide, let it go, you've got one in the chamber, and then when you pull the trigger, squeeze, boom, the gun will fire. Now this fires once. You have to cock it. Some of the smaller guns like this will actually have double action triggers in them, so they're configured slightly different ways. But this being a pocket pistol, this being a small concealed carry type gun, has a fairly long and slightly heavy trigger pull, and that's to stop it going off in your pocket, because it has no manual safety, has no grip safety, has none of those features. So in order to make sure the gun is safe and it's not going to go off unintentionally, you've got this rather long, quite heavy trigger pull. Now, the advantage of a little gun like this, obviously, is concealability. And my preferred way to carry this particular one is in a wallet holster, where it squares off the profile, and that can just sit in my pocket, my cargo pants, my shorts on a summer's day, and to all the world it just looks like a wallet or a cell phone. But it's designed in such a way you can put 2 fingers in, you can access the trigger, you can actually bring it out of the pocket and shoot it at close range with no real difficulties. If you want to hit at a distance, you'd want to get it out of there and get a better grip on it. But this would be a very, very popular concealed carry gun, and this is where the technology has brought us to. You can pick a gun of the size that you feel comfortable carrying, but your limitations on a small gun, small amount of ammunition. So the Ruger LCP 6+1 of 380, which is entry-level defensive cartridge, but that's for the ammunition lesson really. The Model 59 will give you 15 rounds of 9mm, which is a very decent amount of firepower, but this is really a full-size auto. And when we go back to the Glock, the likes of the Glock 23 here, which is sort of the size just below the full size, it's compact enough if you were wearing it in an inside the waistband holster, if you had a baggy t-shirt, if you had something like that. And this is 40 cal, this is serious firepower. You can get it with 13 or 14 round magazine. But this is not a subcompact, this is a sort of smaller than full size. So those are the kind of options that you have open to you. You decide how much firepower you really want to bring with you. You decide what size you're comfortable with carrying, and you go from there. And there endeth the lesson on semi-auto pistols, apart from the classroom session where I'll be taking questions and seeing if we can fill any gaps. Have a good one. Bye-bye.